to get started with the energy and transport sector panel discussion. And this is partly looking backwards, looking forwards, what we discussed last year, why the roundtable sessions are so important, what we're hoping for this year. To start off with, I am so pleased, I'm so honored, I'm really touched that from the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, we have a message from the Chief Secretary, the Ketua Setiausaha Kementerian Tenaga dan Sumber Asli, Datuk Zurinah Pawanteh. Welcome.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to all. First and foremost, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the organizers, CEO Action Network and Climate Governance Malaysia for organizing this event, which is the launch of the 2022 series with the theme of exploring a low-emission pathway for Malaysia. It is indeed an honor for me to be able to address this congregation of eminent minds who will be deliberating and supporting a noble cause in realizing the national aspiration for a low-emission pathway through the energy transition agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, Kementerian Tenaga dan Sumber Asli, KeTSA, as the ministry in charge of policy developments for the power sector, is tasked with a huge responsibility in striking a delicate balance between the three elements of the energy trilemma, namely energy security, affordability, and sustainability. To achieve the intended climate aspiration, Malaysia has charted a low-carbon pathway for the power sector by introducing various policy measures, among others, setting the target of 31% of renewable energy or RE contribution in our installed generation capacity in 2025 and 40% in 2035. The RE installed capacity in Malaysia is projected to increase from its current 9,100 megawatts to 12,916 megawatts in 2025 and furthermore to 17,996 megawatts in 2035. Secondly, gradual reduction in coal generation capacity in the generation mix and eventually phasing out coal-fired generation from the system. It is anticipated that by the year 2033, more than 7,000 megawatts of power capacity from coal will be replaced by non-coal and RE resources. Thirdly, increasing the grid flexibility through integration of technologies and digitalization to pave the way for a smarter grid. Malaysia, being a country blessed with abundance of sunlight, will experience an influx of solar-based generation. Thus, to optimize the development of solar resources in the country, we are planning to introduce utility-scale battery energy storage systems or BESS with a total capacity of 500 megawatts from 2030 to 2034 into our electricity system. Last but not least, Malaysia, under the auspices of ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, Malaysia will continue to work together with our neighbours to explore low-carbon opportunities under the ASEAN Power Grid Programme. Ladies and gentlemen, the government also realized that ESG compliance has become more mainstream among businesses nowadays. It has become an important deciding factor in their growth strategy, investment, procurement, as well as day-to-day business operations. As such, the government has launched the Green Electricity Tariff or GET scheme as an innovative solution to provide option for individuals and companies to decarbonize their electricity consumption. By paying a certain amount of premium, these individuals and companies will be able to source their electricity from RE sources and will receive internationally recognized RE certificate for their GET subscription. We are glad to see that the quota offered under the GET scheme was fully subscribed in March 2022. The pursuit for a lower carbon pathway in the power sector in Malaysia will be guided by the Malaysia Renewable Energy Roadmap, or MIRA, which was launched late last year, outlining related strategies in accelerating RE deployment until 2035. The roadmap is expected to generate an economic spillover of about 20 billion ringgit Malaysia by year 2025 and 33 billion ringgit Malaysia by year 2035. Furthermore, it is projected to create an estimated 47,000 employment opportunities in the RE-related field. Ladies and gentlemen, as a responsible global citizen, Malaysia is committed to reducing its power sector emissions as we journey towards a lower carbon pathway. Our journey for sustainable energy will not be possible without the support, participation, and commitment from various stakeholders, especially businesses and private sectors. Therefore, I hope that this roundtable session will provide the needed insights and promote cross-fertilization of ideas between private sectors and policymakers to chart the transition towards a lower emission pathway. With that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Datuk Zurinah. I really appreciated that you could spend your time to share this very important message with us. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our panelists for today. These are individuals whom I highly respect, and I am so pleased that we have been able to interact more closely over the last few months and years. I would like to introduce the Chairman of Shell, Ivan Tan, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Petronas, Charlotte Wolf-Bai, the Chief Operations Officer at the World Bank Malaysia, Ling Tan, hi, and the President of Malaysian Photovoltaic Industry Association, Davis Chong. So these are individuals whom we heard from last year, well, except of course for Charlotte, who's only recently come to the country. Welcome, Charlotte. But all the others were participating in our roundtable sessions last year and gave us invaluable comments. And we've invited them back this year at the launch just to give us some views why the roundtable sessions are so important. I personally think that this is the largest mobilization of the private sector ever, and we are folding in civil society in this critical conversation on the climate emergency. So we're going to talk about why the roundtable sessions are important to us, what happened last year, what we're looking forward to this year, in this year of action, where climate ambition needs to be increased urgently. I'd like to start off by inviting each of you to please share your thoughts. You'll have around 8 minutes to just speak candidly about what you're feeling. And then we can dive into a round or two of questions. If I can invite Ivan to be followed by Charlotte, Ling, and wrapping up by David. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Datin, Sunita, and good morning, everyone, and fellow panel members. A bit of an open question, I guess, how I'm feeling and how things are shaping up. So thanks for that. I guess, you know, the roundtables that we have here really offer, I guess, in my mind, addresses two key things that we need to be doing in order to help us get towards a low carbon economy, right? And that is urgent action and collective action. So in having these sessions together where we're able to identify, you know, jointly debate, hear each other's views out, it provides us the ability to take considered views to things that then hopefully prompts us all to take urgent and collective action together. I think, I was listening to, I was reading up on the 12th Malaysia plan, just brushing up ahead of this session itself. And I guess, when I read the 12th Malaysia plan, it really does try to address the current issues and how we're going to restart our economy. I think the theme is very much around developing a prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable Malaysia. Now, in that approach being a transformative one does refer to quite strongly a call to action around climate change, specifically around helping the nation become lower in carbon and promoting green growth, sharing the responsibility to do that. And specifically the energy sector is actually compelled to think about the problem as the energy trilemma. And specifically, the energy trilemma is about security, affordability, and carbon. So I guess for all of us in the energy industry, we've got to bear that in mind in terms of how we would justly transition, but not use that as an excuse either to take our time to do this. So for this year, hopefully, together with our joint companies, we'll be able to forge some more tangible partnerships that have, firmer commitments that will be able to also take a joint up view with government so that we can help them develop the right policies to enable the demand side pickup, but also the supply side pickup of energy transition technologies or initiatives, right? Ourselves at Shell, we've been fortunate that we've been able to release our Energy Transition Progress Report recently for 2021. And we hope to continue to play a leading role in helping to transition the world's energy system by supplying the energy we need today, but also accelerating that transition to lower and zero carbon energy types. We've put together a strategy called Powering Progress to do that. And we've already started making some significant investments in lower carbon fuels like advanced biofuels, hydrogen, carbon capture, as well as renewables. And we've taken portfolio action on our upstream and refinery businesses to also start to make progress towards an accelerated transition. We're pleased to say that, by end of last year, we've achieved an 18% reduction on our targets versus 2016. And this is where the coming years, it becomes even more challenging now as we start to ramp up towards our target of a 50% reduction by 2030 of our own emissions. I think together we're going to need to really work this challenge. And I'm really looking forward to the dialogue today to help us develop the right thinking and the right type of policies that we need so that we can go and engage government together around this. Let me leave it at that for now, Datin, and invite my other fellow panel members to share their thoughts too.
Well, thank you very much. So I will take over from here. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. It's great to see you all. Now, I just returned from Europe a couple of days ago from a business trip, and I can't really make my remarks without reflecting on the most difficult times we're living in. Many of you would have visited Europe or at least gained an appreciation of how Europe has grown and prospered over the last 77 years since the Second World War. Now, what I witnessed was something quite different over the last few weeks. Today at train stations across Europe, you see people holding signs in Ukrainian, welcoming refugees as they arrive on an hourly basis across cities in Europe. And this is not a blip in the normal. I would say that this ensuing conflict will have repercussions that will most likely span our lifetimes. And we can see reactions to this already. Countries look to onshore supplier industries. They're looking for self-sufficiency and kind of pulling up the drawbridges, if you like. Now, last year, of course, there was a lot of hope when we could feel that the COVID vaccines seemed to bite and societies emerged from the difficult times of the lockdown and economic freeze, and building back better, building back greener were really strong mantras. And you still see a lot of policies holding on to those or that ethos, if you like. Now, I'm sharing these views because as we are experiencing this horrific disruption to European cohesion, we must shape a better future together. Now, we also know that these recent events in Europe, and also, we can also feel the repercussions here in Malaysia. We don't live in a bubble from these geopolitical events. So we must lead, and we can't just react. So we need to step up and forge a new way forward. Now, I know Datin, Anita, and others, I know the brief today was to be energizing and certainly not downbeat. So I'm going to change my tone now, but I did have to reflect on that because it's very visible, it's very clear, and the world is changing, maybe not in the direction that we were quite hoping for. So earlier this year, Edelman, which is a global PR company, they published their annual Global Trust Barometer. And this is something they publish every year at the World Economic Forum annual meeting. And basically in this global survey of sort of 38,000 respondents across the world, business actually comes out as the most trusted entity in society to deliver a better future. And I'd like to argue that we must use, as business, our customer and supplier relations to build even stronger, mutually reinforcing and trusted relationships nationally and internationally, now when geopolitics is in such turmoil. And we must also stay focused on our climate ambitions, as we just heard from our colleague from Shell. We also need to develop our business in support of a more just society that creates more opportunities for more people. And I believe that this is the only recipe for stronger communities, peace, and progress. And I can't quite believe we're here like in 2022 and we're talking about peace, but this is very much a real issue. But business, I think, can influence a different future from where we are now. So maybe just a couple of pointers to what Petronas is working on and what actions we are taking for a better future. We have a strategy we call Moving Forward Together 50-30-0. And the 50 implies our 50% target of improved cash flow by 2025. And the 30 implies our 30% ambition of obtaining revenues from non-traditional sources other than oil and gas by 2030. And the 0 depicts our ambition to reach net zero carbon emission by 2050. Now, these are not sort of flippant targets. They actually depict a transformation to a very different future from our past. I'd also like to remind us of the purpose or statement of purpose of Petronas, which goes as follows: a progressive energy and solutions partner, enriching lives for a sustainable future. And this purpose is important because it really guides our endeavor, and it also sets the tone for how we're developing our business for the future. So we are changing our mindset from a commodities business where until now, we kind of, whatever we can find, we can sell. What we're looking at now is to work out what customers' pain points are, and then to double down and solving them together with our partners. And we are focusing and investing very strongly in innovation across the whole organization, turning risks to opportunities that will bring out a better society as an outcome at the end. So we're focusing on decarbonization of our own operations, but also scaling up renewables and low carbon solutions, as well as education, because this is about actually not just changing how business operates, but also how our minds and skills can be deployed for a slightly different kind of future. Now, we also know that we just heard also from Ivan that we must speed up and scale up. And I have a few examples to this. Recently, we announced that we will launch a carbon management unit in Petronas. And the aim is not just to reduce our own carbon emissions through CO2 capture and sequestration, but also to offer the so-called CCS as a service for other high-emitting industries. We've also announced the intention of setting up a clean energy solutions business that will bring together our interests in renewables, hydrogen, and green mobility. And this is again about working relentlessly to help solve the problem, not just for ourselves around emissions, but also for our partners. So I'll leave it at that and hand over to my next panelist. Thank you.
Hi, Datin, Sunita. Shall I go? And thank you so much. Hi, I am Ling from the World Bank, and I concur definitely with today's tone and what Sunita has said earlier in terms of we need to urgently raise our ambition, and that means the speed and the way we think. We have to do things differently. The call to action is very important, and what it means is really to have the evidence, the data, to allow us to be much more specific and not just about talk and talk, year in, year out, but be specific so we have better design in our policy making and is also in our implementation. So with this in mind, allow me, actually I prepared some slides to justify why I need slides, that we need to have better evidence and data and to really translate this, our call for action into real sustainable and specific areas that we should do. And let me do this now. Yeah. So just to, you probably have heard this, and this is from the UN report, UN SDGs and why sustainable growth matters. And this, it might be a little bit, we can say, no, this is silly. We don't need 3 planets, but this is really on mathematical modeling, and to see that if based on the current production and consumption that we have, and based on population growth by 2050, it may mean that we need 3 planets. But what really it's really saying in this graph, it's really based on the material footprint, the natural resources that we are extracting out, and also the agriculture, the land use that we have, the ocean use that we are doing right now. And if we are continuing the pace of the population and GDP growth, which is year on year, if we are thinking about positive year on year growth, the material footprint. And here's the call for action. If we want to raise our ambition, can we think differently? Can we actually decouple material footprint growth from economic growth? So how do we value and measure a better quality of life for all of us, and to be much more sustainable, that material footprint growth? And here, I'd like to just give an example that the UK has consumed less energy than back in 1970. And that's 50 years ago. And this is on the back of higher population growth, higher GDP growth, and yet they have consumed less energy. And this is a country that has winter, and we don't have winter. So in the sense that here we see that the UK's economy has grown more than 3-fold while emissions has fallen. And you can see that, yes, the economy has grown and changed and shifted from manufacturing to services, which probably explain the lower energy growth consumption, but its population and GDP growth. And we compare to other OECD countries, the UK is doing well, and there is a downward trend across the different countries. So here is then the call for action. How about Malaysia? And can Malaysia do so? And here we see that the energy consumption in Malaysia has been growing year on year, and the different sources of fuel, where you have petroleum products, which is the majority, and a lot of the different fuel types, whether it's coal, gas, diesel, goes into electricity, gas, and coal and coke. So the majority here that we see in terms of fuel energies is the 67%, 68% is electricity as well, petroleum products. And where does it goes to? It goes to the different sectors, and by far it's industry, transportation, and residential commercial. So residential commercial here is electricity as well as gas mainly. And of course, industry, you see the petroleum products like the oil, petroleum products, oil, lubricants for machinery, electricity, and transport. It's fuel, it's petrol, and it's diesel. So if we would like to have then a nuance when we talk about energy reduction, really what we see here is in transport, which is petrol and diesel, and industries perhaps is electricity. In that sense, if we like to then move towards an energy and decarbonization, and we refer to the 12 Malaysia plan on net zero by 2050, how is that possible? And here we see that our energy consumption, where it's electricity, is a lot of coal and gas, especially in Peninsular Malaysia, but there's loss in transmission, there's energy loss. And how do we reduce the energy loss, electricity loss? We have also the other sources of fuel, whether it's petroleum, and there's less loss in the production and in the transmission for electricity. And this is the part that where if we want to see reduction of overall energy and electricity, it's really then how then do we reduce the loss so that we can reduce that material input. If we then look at the capacity mix for Malaysia, it's important then that to see what's our projection, and we still have coal and gas all the way through to 2037. This is Peninsular Malaysia, and it's different for Sabah and Sarawak. Renewable energy mix, we have raised the ambition, and we have seen it going up in recent years, up to even 2015, and you can see it's 20%, but it has 2025, you can see that it remains about more or less the same at 21 to 20% all the way through. So if we really would like then to see how can we really increase the renewable energy, and that this is a shared, can we reduce the energy pie? Can we make it smaller so that the RE share is also higher? Can all, at the same time, if we remove the actual output of RE is also higher, that it will also then be much higher. So this is the area that we see in terms of, if we talk about energy and transport in Malaysia, and is it really an energy trilemma? And this is where, if we call for action and raising our ambition, is that we need to be critical to have better policy design. Is it really a trilemma that security and sustainability and equity is at odds with each other? Can we really, but this tree, can it really support each other? So in this sense, reduction of energy, and it can be free. It doesn't cost anything. It can be, there was also a call by the government ministries to reduce energy, and that's just increasing the temperature to 24 degrees Celsius for air condition. And can we do that? Can we have it a policy across Malaysia? Energy efficiency, the bill has yet to be tabled for the last 5-6 years, and this is important. And this is an area that, in terms of the energy landscape, that the overall reduction of the energy use would be key. We also have, in terms of accelerating city and community level adoption, and because Malaysia is already 80% urban and semi-urban, it's important that we think about community level, city level of renewable energy. For, I think, a lot of us who are here in this room, we're also environmentalists at heart. Whether we see large-scale solar in the midst of forests and jungles, or would we like to see also smaller scale installations on the rooftops, and really ramp that up as an incentive, smaller scale versus large scale solars. And also, let's move into from electricity to transport, which is the highest consumption of petrol and diesel. And here the graph shows that Malaysia, in terms of car ownership, are by far the highest, one of the highest in Asia. And of course, the European Union, Japan, US is higher. But per capita basis, Malaysia outranks everyone in ASEAN. As you can see, the Southeast Asia car ownership is much, much lower. The other 6 countries, Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, is much, much lower. So Malaysia actually, as you can see, is much higher. All right, so we have a huge amount of car ownership on the roads. And this is an area that even my friends, my family, and I live in Tamantun, who are known to be very green people, who are green advocates. But many, we have blind spots. We take our car and drive down the road, and it's only 300 meters to go to the shop. We don't walk, we don't cycle. We drive to the shops just down the road. We have fossil fuel subsidies, and it benefits those who have cars. The poor may not have, they have motorbikes and all. So really, if we remove fossil fuel subsidies, it is the right thing to do. It may be difficult politically to do so, but if we say this is important and we remove that fossil fuel subsidies and we protect the poor, the B40 would then have that cap, and we can find ways, think differently on protecting and providing that assurance and cash assistance to the poor. So, and also like public transport, it's important. And when we behave very differently, when we go to Europe, we go to London, we go to Singapore. But in Malaysia, how many of us here in this room actually use public transport? And really, it's at the end of the day, it's about reducing cars. EV is good by itself, but the bigger picture is really reducing the cars, making public transport more accessible, us as individuals using it. And it has great benefits, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and also its economic growth. And we can see it many places in many cities around the world. So I just end here. It's not an energy trilemma. It can coexist. I think then shifting that narrative will be key. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. That is Sunita. I think I'll be following on to speak for the last person to speak. Being the last person to speak, I think it's good. It's good to see Charlotte and I want to bring up the two huge energy powerhouse to emphasize the commitment again, and mainly you bring up a lot of great data. A lot of things that I want to say here. That's, I think, being one of the solar players or solar platform stakeholders in the industry in Malaysia, and we are in the midst of transforming transitions from more renewable energy mix into Malaysia energy sectors. And of course, the past 10 years, I think we have done a lot. Government, authorities, and the industry also have done a lot since COP21 until COP26 last December, that Malaysia government has raised its unconditional term to 45% in the commitment to reduce green gas houses, and then to become net zero carbon in 2050. That's the commitment we have. And in the past, we also see Carbon City Master Plan, low carbon mobility blueprint until from 2021 to 2030. So, and the latest, I think we can see that Malaysia roll out the RE roadmap, MyRER for 2020 to 2035, and how we want to increase renewable energy mix into our energy sectors. So it is very clear that the government, the market, the authorities are in line in the effort to transform our energy sectors and to build the business with increasing renewable energy mix to clean our power utility sectors. And we know the path to net zero emissions narrow, and we need a lot of supports from big players and the authorities to have massive deployment on all available clean energy technologies, such as the renewable energies, and solar obviously play a very important role in the renewable energy mix, which we have around 70% of the renewable energy mix. And of course, in the later part, the EV, the energy efficient building retrofits is to be implemented towards the downstream as well. And we see these roundtable sessions today serve as a platform to address all critical issues we have seen from the panel sessions, to address all critical sustainability concerns, to discuss in between energy sectors important agenda, and what are the key actions that and the pain points we have that Mei brought up a lot in this country to achieve the energy sector's goal, that how we're going to transform the industry. And maybe I want to bring up a few that key momentum that is gaining from the last 10 years since we implement FIT, then NEM, then LSS, and until now, I think we do look at potentially we'll move on to P2P, TPA, virtual PPA. This is what the whole industry looking at after this. And the low carbon solutions actually started from RE with solar introductions. I think, as I said, solar play a very important role to have almost 70%. So we do see that it being implemented from rooftop, then to LSS, then to LSS, and I think a huge rooftop or cellco model to increase the adoptions of solar energy in Malaysia. And we do see the take-up rate in the market from FIT time to LSS and NEM now. The market has been moving healthy. And we do see that the market is actually moving faster than how our policy map it out. So we do urge the authorities or the Ministry of Malaysia that we can speed up the policy to enable more different model to deploy solar technologies into C&I segment or even the utility segments as well, to enable more buildings, more IPP to become renewable energy. And after that, of course, we can focus on transport and building energy efficient as well. When we look at the last 10 years, this, I would say 2022 is one of the pivotal years that we are hoping to see a lot of changes with what we can see development, the deployment of solar projects more and more in LSS or even rooftop model. And this and with the latest of COP26, we declare that by 2050 that we want to achieve net zero. And by 2030, we want to meet COP26 target to reduce whole country greenhouse gases emission by 45%. By 2025, we want to reach 31% RE in the power supply mix, which as part of the industry stakeholders, I highly believe and highly want us to overachieve this 31%. By 2035, we want to achieve 40% RE in the power supply mix. And this is all referred to my IR as one of my agenda as from MPIA is always, we want this target to be higher. We think Malaysia and the whole industry, the whole community, we can do it better than what we said in my IR report. So we all want to make more business to be more sustainable starts, to be aware of the issue on hand and understand how important to make the changes, both for the business, to the planet or in the community as well. So sustainability in business isn't good for environment and society at large. It's also good for the business itself to grow. And I think we believe from financing, from the customers, is the ESG agenda plays more and more important role in the business decisions as well. So lastly, touch base with following areas of MPIA. From MPIA, we do want to call government and policymakers to have more creative and more mandate to rooftop solar. Example, rooftop solar policy, example, P2P, example, that what we're working on the TPA policy, virtual PPA policy. We want it to be a reality in this year with the P2P sandbox started in by TMB and Seri. In 2019, we have run a pilot projects. We do want to see how can it be practically implemented to let the energy demand and supply settle at the distribution level, so we can actually increase the renewable energy mix, and also to enable P2P, TPA and virtual PPA policy to let the large scale consumer of electricity to be able to consume direct or renewable energy through the grid network. And that is how we want to increase the RE mix. So that's all the key message that we want to bring from MPIA. Thank you, Datin Sri Sunita.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Davis, for your time. It's such a pleasure to see you here. And now I just want to go into one round of questions, and then we can take questions from the floor. Please put your questions into the Q&A box, and panelists, please indicate if there's some questions that you would have a burning desire to respond to. I want to start with Ivan. You know, Charlotte referred to the Ukraine war, and globally, we are seeing this disconnect between marketplaces and government policies versus the declarations that all countries have made. And this disconnect is seeing energy prices soar. What is the unambiguous policy signaling that we need to see, especially as the 3 IPCC reports and the upcoming COP in Sharm el-Sheikh is demanding even more urgent climate commissions? What are your views, Ivan?
That went quite quickly from being open and to quite a serious question, I must say. Yeah, thanks. I may not have caught all the different elements of that, but let me try to answer it in 2 parts. I think first of all, there is the whole macro environment, which is exacerbated by the Russian-Ukraine war. I think Charlotte mentioned mentioned it in her recent trip back to Europe. And I think what has happened there, maybe just to help to put a view to this, a lens to this, is how we see it as we operate in Europe as well, is that what has happened is that a lot of the, if you like, the more affordable energy supply that has come from Russia into Europe has now been put at risk because as you can read from the sort of media and the papers. There's been lots of discussions about cutting our reliance on oil and gas from Russia. So what that has created is that there is a threat to the day-to-day ability for people to live their lives because power and energy is not available as it previously was. So therefore, the energy security element comes into play. And what then countries have had to do is to scramble to actually find alternative sources of existing energy types like oil and gas from other places to supplement that. Now, this creates an opportunity, of course, to accelerate investments in lower carbon fuels and change the energy mix. I think to Mei Li's point earlier around, I like the way she's framed it around coexistence, but I think, in the short term, the reality as well that we all can see is that investments in alternative sources of energy does take time. There's a payback that comes with it. And then, the decision makers need to weigh that up, short-term price fluctuations versus longer-term returns. And I think that's where some of these things turn out to be not necessarily able to be completely aligned today. But in time, I do agree that we must move towards a lower carbon economy. But I think the reality for these countries today is that they have to grapple with the short-term lack of supply and security issues. And therefore, when you scramble, you have to pay more for all these alternative sources in the short term. So I think that's the first part. And I think the second part of it, I think it's about what type of policies around government can we have to help us, I guess, demand more urgent climate commitments and using potentially the current climate to actually accelerate some of this. I think with all of these here, we all agree that we need to move faster and accelerate transition is so important. I think we also agree that policy frameworks need to be holistic and comprehensive. In our Malaysia plan, I know that one of the elements is a whole of government approach is used. I think that the issue with many of these type of dilemmas is that you have multiple parties that are involved here. So for example, in the case of climate change, you need the Ministry of Finance, to help with incentives. For example, you have the Ministry of Environment that want to drive the right climate targets. You've got the Ministry of Energy and Water that tries to help to facilitate a lot of the discussion. So you can see that there are multiple parties that are involved, and a whole of government approach around how you coordinate across the different ministries is something that is important for us in order to achieve that. I think in addition to some of these, I think what we also need to be clear around is that, what are the policies that you will need to drive the demand side as well as on the supply side. So let's pick an industry, because there are so many industries here. This is quite a wide topic, but let me just choose the power industry, where I do believe that there are more clear and commercial pathways towards an accelerated move towards electrification. So demand side policies, and that means that it's about how do you generate the right level of uptake from consumers, where you see that you've got to help companies quickly and efficiently sign power purchase agreements. How do you support competitive markets to generate and supply and increase that demand through incentives and standards? For example, set a timeline for when all cars need to be non-internal combustion engines, for example, right? And then on the supply side of things, you've got to be clear around how do you utilize the levers we have to impose carbon pricing, time-limited incentives to make sure that you incentivize the right technologies in the right time frames so that that uptake is taken. Sorry, Sunita, it's quite a complex question. I hope I provided some guidance around how we look at things around the industry and how it needs to form.
Absolutely, Ivan. Thank you. That was a really good overview, and that neatly segues on to Charlotte, because we launched the ASEAN network, and around ASEAN, I'm hearing the feedback. This is a Western agenda. They created the problem. They need to find the solutions. They haven't given any funding, etc., etc. How can Petronas Malaysia help contribute towards this discourse? How do we evolve an Asian narrative of this unprecedented transition we are facing, especially thinking about the oil and gas ecosystem and the value chain and the need to decarbonize, move away from our fossil fuel dependence? What are your thoughts, Charlotte?
Thank you very much for that quite broad question, but thankfully Ivan here did a good job in answering some of it. I think first of all, we probably need to focus on the price. So there are different estimates around the world, depending on who you ask, but there's one estimate around energy investments required for sort of net zero, achieving a net zero future is about $250 trillion by 2050. That is an awful lot of money, and is much bigger investments are required every year to go into the future of energy systems. Now, Malaysia has been sort of a global manufacturing hub, very successfully so. Now, how can we bring some of that 250 trillion to Malaysia and service the world as it is decarbonizing? That is the opportunity. And I think that's a strength also of Malaysian society, to galvanize around those customer needs, if you like. And this is also why I wanted to mention around peace and cohesion. We really must now work so hard in sort of nurturing our existing relationships, but also future relationships, because geopolitics won't help us right now. But we do know that the writing is on the wall around decarbonization, and this is happening. There's nothing stopping it, even if we're having a bit of a supply crunch on energy right now. So I think focusing on the big price will help us. It will also help us being a bit more, see this as a positive opportunity rather than just as a risk that needs to be mitigated. There are returns in this, and that's why the whole industry, the whole energy transition space is a very vibrant space right now. Now, I would also say that, and I must sort of maybe repeat some of the points that Ivan just made, because they're very, very important. So how do we set the tone in Malaysia, but also in an ASEAN context? So the Malaysian government's been brilliant in actually setting out the kind of the goalpost. let's aspire for net zero carbon emissions as early as 2050. So let's work backwards from that. But we need a common vision for all the stakeholders in society. We need a coherent narrative and an alignment of priorities. We need a massive debate and engagement of all constituent parts of Malaysian society, because trade-offs will need to be had. We need to also focus on carbon pricing and all those policies that were mentioned. What does it mean, and get a clear line of sight of policy. What are the exact targets? I think Ivan said again, if you don't have a date, people don't have the line of sight of how they should be investing. We also need to look at how can we remove inefficient policies that might be undermining the sort of green growth agenda that the government's committed us all to. So this whole of government, whole of society approach is absolutely critical. And because it's such a transformative sort of space, we can't kind of continue as before. We do need to engage very solidly. So that's sort of maybe a little bit on the Malaysian side. Now, what Petronas sort of has done a little bit more broadly than just Malaysia, and maybe, sorry, two words just about Malaysia. We are working very closely with our suppliers around net zero carbon emissions, around transparency around emissions, but also upskilling and raising more awareness about what is needed and where do we all need to go. And we're also looking at financing frameworks and so on. But on the ASEAN side, Petronas, late last year, we launched something called a methane roundtable for national oil and gas companies in the region, because we're also very conscious that fuel choices won't be made just on Petronas reducing its carbon emissions. We need the whole industry in the region actually to really embrace this agenda. We are Datuk Tengku Taufik, the CEO of Petronas, he's actually co-chairing the APEC Business Advisory Council, and through this APEC environment, we put forward some very interesting, I think, proposals around green growth and also how to reduce emissions from hard to abate industries and so on. And they were unanimously endorsed actually by the plenary recently in Singapore. So there's quite a lot going on, but I think this common vision is absolutely critical.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. We're running out of time. I'm just going to have two more questions for Mei Ling and Davis, but we will get to your questions when we issue the accompanying blog post. I will invite all the panelists to comment on it. But for World Bank, so Mei Ling, you have been intimately involved in the conversations around carbon pricing, voluntary carbon markets, and as we know, in the EU, UK, the compulsory, the mandated trading schemes seem to be very successful, including spinning off even a futures market. And this gives the private sector a very clear sense of the direction of travel when government is willing to intervene so forcefully, especially in highly carbonized industries. So your question, do voluntary carbon markets need to be preceded first by debts? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Sunita. It's quite a loaded question, since you know that I'm quite intimately involved in the conversations with government and other players and Bursa. I try to then just look at it objectively. All right. There are many countries in the world that has done only VCM, the voluntary carbon market. Some countries only do the emissions trading scheme. Some countries do carbon tax, various carbon pricing instruments, and some do a mix of 1, 2, or 3, right? In this region, we do see where Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia has also been looking at carbon tax and also voluntary carbon market. So it doesn't need to precede VCM and then debts, or debts first, right? What I see now in terms of the voluntary carbon market, the stated intention to implement VCM by next year is as a soft approach. And this soft approach, and it has to be contextualized to the current local and political economy and the readiness of the country. So the soft approach here is really to build awareness and understanding in the marketplace and also amongst policymakers. What are the implications of having debts in all the sectors or in specific sectors? We need to build institutional capabilities. We need to build the infrastructure for tracking, monitoring, and certification. So we need to get Malaysia being a federal country and with many, many states, and also and how this offsetting carbon crediting will work. So it's really about VCM, what we see as a soft approach to educate the marketplace, build capacity and build the infrastructure, and then later for domestic ETS. So that's one. But the carbon pricing tools is not the end all and be all. It's really the end goal at the end of the day is better quality of life for all of us, and for animals, and for the diversity, for the land, for fresh air, for clean waters. And that's really in mind. And my slides earlier actually points to that, right? There are many roads that can lead to Rome, and energy reduction, energy efficiency itself, are areas, and the ones that I put out on transport, the shift from more private ownership of cars to public transport are all examples that we can do now. We don't need a compliance and stick approach or a forceful approach and wait for the government sometimes to do this. It will come, but I think where I really like what Charlotte says, now there's greater trust in the private sector in businesses. So the role of businesses and us as decision makers in our households, as consumers, as amongst ourselves, our peers and family and friends, we can change behaviors. We can do nudges, and we can be advocates in the public sphere, and work with CSOs, with the youths, with policymakers in making that change. So we can use a lot of carrots and not just stick in that sense, and look at energy reduction. I think that is really an understated area. Reduce energy and increase energy efficiency. So the EE and the Conservation Act is very important. And I hear that if it's going to be tabled and enacted, that will be a game changer.
Absolutely. We fully agree with you. Thank you so much, Mei Ling. So I'm just going to have one last question from MPIA, Davis Chong, and then maybe if I can just invite the panelists just to give 1 or 2 sentences in wrapping up this whole session. Davis, so calls for government to mandate rooftop solar. P2P has already been sandboxed by TNB CEDA. Why is it taking so long? What do we need to make this a reality this year?
I think we've been talking about the energy trilemma that Melly brought up. We keep on talking to the authority as well. Energy trilemma, no, most important, of course, one of the important perspectives we look at it is affordability. Changing our grid to smart grid, changing our energy source to renewable energy, all those activities are taking cost to do it. But one of the things that we want the authority to understand that the market demand are there and the market stakeholders are there to address this issue. So let us handle this issue rather than we're kind of keeping in the dark that we don't have the pricing mechanism, the calculations, the policy to make it. Probably we run out of time there. I want to bring out the important message in making TPA, P2P, VPPA policy out. Is not on the infrastructure. The problem is not on the infrastructure. The problem is not on the affordability as well. And I do agree in certain way that the authority claim that we need to take care of the energy security. We don't want ourselves to have the problems like some of the countries like Vietnam, like Taiwan to face some of the energy crisis. We do agree that, but the 2 other problems are not there. So roll out the policy, let us know what is the problem that the authority is the most important concerns of the authority, and what are the problems that you want the industry stakeholders and even the consumers, the community to take it. I clearly can tell you in the past 10 years, we see how the renewable energy, especially solar energy demand growth in terms of consumers, industrial, even I can say the carbon credit demand in Malaysia has grown as well. So let the market take up this issue because we want problems and we want to solve it.
Great. That's a great summary. Okay, you guys have been a great panel. I'm so pleased to see all of you again. If we can just take turns, your closing remarks, please. Ivan, Charlotte, Mei Ling, and Davis.
Thanks, Datin, Sunita. Yeah, so I guess, really enjoyed the opportunity to connect with everybody and learn from each other here. I think, just 2 points maybe. I think, with managing this huge challenge that we are confronted with, I think the first thing we need to be doing is making sure that we are responsible with our own emissions from the businesses that we look after. I think we've got to ensure that, we're focusing on energy efficiency, we're doing everything we can to reduce the level of our emissions as the energy sector, and also look at how do we transition to lower carbon opportunities. I think the second thing is that, the transformation of this energy system is going to be, beyond just a single business to actually undertake. And that means that we're going to have to start ensuring that we form collaborations that come up with, joint commitments to actually start to progress this forward. And I think the more quickly we can commit on joint policy frameworks that we can then put forward to government such that we can work together on it, I think we're on the right path there to actually accelerating the transition.
And I would say that the government's very clear kind of what the end result should be. So of course we can sit here and complain policy is not in place, but to be honest, we all need to just develop our own management strategies of how can we contribute to the sort of lofty ambitions that the government has set out, whilst we will also then contribute in engagements such as these roundtables to provide insights into what meaningful policy would be. Government needs us to support them in this endeavor. And I would also say that around this call today, the beating heart of corporate Malaysia is here today in the audience. So actually, it's very much at the end of our fingertips to create the change that we all need.
Maybe I'll do it first. Okay, thanks, Datin, Seri, Sunita. Thanks for the invitations. And as the same message that I carry out every time, renewable energy source, renewable energy electrons is going to be cheaper. End of the day, it will be one of the cheapest energy that you're going to get. And we need to believe on it. And it's a tough process to going through all the hurdles that we have right now. End of the day, the LCOE of all electrons from renewable energy source until the distribution, until the consumer, it will be the cheapest energy that you're going to get. And it's clean energy. And it's a process to get to that. And I echo Ivan's message that it takes everyone's effort in this value chain to make that happen.
My closing messages, there are three things. One, raise the ambition, and that requires us to think differently. And that is also challenging the energy trilemma. Is it really a trilemma? Because it implies it's a trade-off, and these three can't coexist. And I would like to challenge it's not a trilemma. Second, have data and evidence, so we are much better in our policy making and implementation. So the high-level policy is there in the 12 Malaysia plan, but bring it down to a level that can be implemented, like Davis was saying, that is maybe it's not there. The policies are lacking, and that's why we see the renewable energy, the space is 20% for 2035 to 2037. So it's really an area that we have to think differently and act differently. The third is then the call to action, then based on the data and evidence, how then as businesses here, and also we are as households. So we know it's industries, we know it's electricity, and we know it's transport. These are the three areas. And in transport, is petrol and diesel, is car ownership use, and changing our behaviors. Thank you.
Fabulous. It's been so great to see all of you. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. And we will be in touch to move this ahead.